So I think we'll get started. We'll tell you a little bit about who we are, a little bit about what we're going to talk about, and then we're going to chat for about a half an hour.
Yeah.
And after that, we'll do Q&A.
Yeah, perfect.
So I'll start. My name is Erin, as she mentioned, and my background for the past 10-ish years has been in some variation of business-to-business technology marketing. I've worked for some super sexy companies, like GitHub and OpenDNS. Also, been the first marketing hire at a really tiny startup that didn't go anywhere. So we can talk about all of those experiences today.
Yeah.
And that's me, yeah.
Yeah, and so a little bit about myself. Same experience. I've been last 14 years working at several B2B SaaS companies, WebEx, Marin Software. I was at PagerDuty for the last 4 years and recently joined Algolia in January. So excited to really tell our story and, and then kind of get to your difficult Q&A session, I guess.
Yeah, make it difficult.
Yeah.
I want to talk about benchmarking conversion rates.
That's right.
Okay, so what we think would be a good place to talk, because I think all of you come from different backgrounds. We have some people who just started their companies and some people who have been working in very specific roles in marketing. And so we're just going to start kind of from the beginning. Where do you get started if you're just growing out your team? And then we're going to talk a little bit about scale. So how do you then build on what you've started? And then ultimately, how do you use tools and technology to extend that even further? And then we'll jump into a Q&A.
Yeah, perfect.
So we thought a good place to get started is actually getting started.
Yeah, that's right.
So some of the earliest tactics that you can focus on, we want you to have some practical things to walk away with. So if you're just, a couple of co-founders, maybe a couple of engineers, maybe even you have a support person. Kamal, you want to dive into what you might think about as like earliest tactics?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is like the vaguest of vague questions to start with, and I think maybe it's perfect because there's so many different directions and things you can kind of, point your direction when you're thinking about marketing, especially even before you have any marketers, right? So, you can focus on content and digital and events and docs and, there's so many different things. And I think one of the key, one of the things that I've learned along the ways is just that there's a different path to success for every single company, and no company gets to that success looking like every other company before that's done there and been there. And so I think one of the things that we want to take away is just be flexible and be open-minded about where you want to try and where you want to test. And that kind of then leads me to okay, you're you're early, you probably don't have any marketers. What are the first few things that you may be thinking about to really get started and to really start thinking about okay, where do we actually maybe just point our direction to get that first few momentum kind of pieces going. And so one of the areas I think is really kind of just building that culture of marketing within any organization, and kind of almost that thought that every single person in your company is a marketer, right? And what I mean by that is there are so many different aspects and interactions you have, whether you're at a meetup, you're actually talking to customers in a support role, you're at a conference, you're thinking about going to or writing a blog post, and every single one of those interactions is is marketing in itself, right? And so kind of building that early culture and kind of getting the employee buy-in and allowing them to help kind of participate too, right? And so kind of just going back to my PagerDuty days, one of the things I remember I was fondly of is the first week I got there, the first person, there was 9 days when we had 50 people, and one of the 9 days comes up to me, he's like, hey, I was the first PM and I'm doing the search, right? The paid search. And then there's another Dave that comes up and he's like, oh, I'm the one that helped build the website. And there's all these different people along the way that contributed in different areas, and it was kind of just refreshing to see that everyone was really thinking about marketing and was really behind kind of what it needed to do to look like success, right? And so finding those people, building kind of that muscle early on, I think is really important. And then I think it's really some of the tactics, right? And I think you'll get to some of that. I think you probably have some thoughts around this, but content early on is key, right? I think figuring out the content, starting to talk about what you're doing and what's important to you and how you're changing the world, it really matters. I think going to events, speaking at meetups, interacting with others, talking about, and sharing your experiences and learnings, I think always kind of starts that momentum. And then I think the other big thing that I've always is like your website is your biggest asset, maybe outside of your product, and really think about optimizing your website. There's so many companies that I've been at or I've seen where like the website is so poorly constructed, doesn't really tell you anything, and you're probably leaving dollars and leads on the table. So those are probably the areas I'd start. Like, I know you probably had a lot of experiences along the way and maybe things to share too.
Yeah, so I think particularly as we're talking to developer tool companies, we sort of have a luxury of knowing that we're all pretty much like-minded in that creating content, super useful content to help developers do things, and building community is really important. So let's assume that even as an early stage team, early stage company, you're thinking about those things. I wanted to call out some kind of like pro tips for how to divide your time. One of them is, like you mentioned, every moment is a sort of a marketing moment. Maximize your encounters. Like if you are getting a lot of really great tweets, like turn those tweets into conversations that turn into case studies, that turn into content on your website. If you have support questions that are requiring a lot of time from like your one support person or your half-time support person / engineer, turn that into an FAQ that turns into an update to your docs, that turns into content on a marketing landing page. So make the most of every encounter. You mentioned you kind of using the marketers you have. I've been at companies where marketing is not really, it's kind of a scary term. Like, I don't want to be a marketer. I want to be a developer. I want to work in docs. I would just flip that and say, like, figure out what makes people feel satisfied and excited. We have an open source project, and encouraging other people to make their first commit to an open source project, like that is marketing. But if your docs person gets excited by doing that, then help them build like a goal around getting people to make their first commit to your open source project. It's not always just like giving talks and writing blog posts. It's just creating and reinforcing those moments. This one seems like a no-brainer, but be ridiculously generous. Like, I don't know how many people in here are wearing like a company t-shirt, have a sticker on their laptop or a hoodie, right? Like swag is kind of our currency, but generosity goes beyond like swag. So if you're already doing that well, like figure out other ways to be generous, whether it's especially as a founder, taking a minute to reply to people's tweets. But even anyone in the organization, if you're an engineer, taking a minute and having coffee with someone just starting out and helping them understand how you built your own architecture, writing a blog post on how you're building your stack. Those are all ways to be generous where you're sharing what your experience was and you're giving back to a community in a way that I'd selfishly call marketing. And then the last one, I think this is close to your heart too, but like avoid the shoulds. And this applies, I think, as much at 5 people as it does at 35 with a team of 5 in marketing. You don't need to go to South by Southwest and have a massive activation. Like, you don't need an April Fool's joke. No. Like, you're never going to do it as good as Google, and it's a massive waste of your resources. You mentioned a really good one. Don't spend $100,000 at reInvent.
There's so many different things it's easy to kind of get stuck in trying to do everything at once, and kind of just really focus on the few things and try to do those right? I think that's the key. The swag thing was really important, and I think the reason I wanted to say is like PagerDuty was had this really quirky brand early on, and we had these cool like "Don't hate the pager, hate the game" taglines, and those resonated so well, and people would like line up out the door to grab these t-shirts. And you'd see them all around the city, and you'd see them all around kind of different even cities you'd go to, outside San Francisco. And I think that kind of branding really helped kind of take us off in the developer community, beyond then kind of just spending some money on some AdWords or other things that might be another alternative, right?
Yeah, and the best time to do that, I think, is when you are really small, because when you hire a marketing team and tell them to come up with something clever, it's like when someone says, "Be funny," or like you speak another language and someone says, "Oh, say something in French." Like, that never works how you think it's going to work. So let like the founders and the people who are super close to it come up with those taglines and the swag and ideas that are going to connect with your audience, because ultimately they're building something for themselves in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So maybe next topic, I think like hiring always comes up when I talk to people, right? People are always curious, like when are we ready to hire the first marketing person? You know, like how would you answer that, and what kind of advice would you give?
Yeah. Okay, so great question. When are we ready to hire the first marketing person? So I think the scenarios that we've just described, like all of them pull attention from core product development, or even if you're a technical co-founder, like doing engineering work.
Yep.
And so when you feel like you've sort of had your attention like repeatedly pulled in these other directions, but you're starting to feel an itch, like, and I hate to say this, that this is just a gut feel, but you're starting to feel this itch of, I'm spending all of my time over here and I no longer know what's happening over here. That's probably a good time to hire your first marketing person for a couple of reasons. One, you've probably spread yourself thin enough that you don't know what your programs are doing,
Yep.
or whether or not if you do more of the same, it will have returns for you. You also probably don't have enough bandwidth to start introducing dimensionality or different kinds of experiments, right?
Yep.
And so having somebody who's focused on marketing to start thinking about those things, to kind of take audit of what your site looks like, what your messaging looks like, how your AdWords are performing, what your very basic email campaigns are doing, and then think about optimizing those and introducing some new core programs is probably the right time.
Yeah, makes sense.
What do you think?
I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, you want to, for me, I think it's also the when is also important, is like you never want to do it too late. And kind of from personal experience, I've always gone into a company where I'm hired and the first month they're like, okay, these are your goals that we've already set for you because you missed kind of the planning session. And then it's you need to double your leads by month 3 or something, right? And so I'm like, okay, well, if you wanted us to do that, you probably needed to hire me like 6 months ago. And so I guess the recommendation is, how do you plan in advance and foresee kind of the challenges? Because your leads or your signups or your trials or whatever you're doing are not going to scale linearly, right? And maybe early on you're getting a lot of momentum. You think things are great, and we can kind of put off hiring the marketing person now or wait a little longer. But sooner than you think, you probably are going to need that help and that muscle to start thinking about, okay, what's next and what do we do beyond this? And hiring takes a long time, right? So you could think about a 3-month process of just finding the right person, and then I would think like once that person's hired, you're probably looking at a 3 to about a 3-month ramp for them to get up to speed. Just like any sales rep comes aboard and there's like that sales ramp, you're going to be like trying to get up to speed yourself in a marketing role too, right? Like learning all the systems, learning what's worked, what's not worked, even trying to figure out if some of this information is even available, and then start putting the programs in place to actually get going, right? And so for me, I guess one of the advice I'd give is just like, hey, like really think about, start foreseeing some of the challenges and areas you want to grow into, like maybe 6 months in advance, and don't wait before it's too late, right? Because I think then you kind of get stuck in this place where you needed the help, and now you're kind of like waiting for this person to ramp up, and maybe you have this unrealistic expectations for them to kind of start off the bat, right?
Yeah, and I think that I'm going to talk a little bit about what that first hire might look like, but to your point about not waiting until it's too late, the thing about it is if you make the right first marketing hire, there's no shortage of work. And so what I mean by the right first marketing hire is I think of this person as being sort of capable of doing what I would call like the 5 C's, which makes sense because I'm a marketer, so I give things clever names. So, customer, content, community, campaigns.
I don't even know what the other one is. Community, customers, campaigns.
Content, campaigns. I don't know. There's one more C in there. I'll
conversion.
Tweet at me. I'll tell you. But basically, you're omni marketer. This person is probably really, really good at writing. Maybe they've spent a couple years at an agency and they've done, a lot of pitching. They've put together some basic like social media programs, some messaging. They've written a ton of blog posts. Even if you're a developer tool company and you've already got somewhat of a content creation engine from either a dev advocate or somebody who's straddling that role with engineering, maybe it's coming out of docs or support, this is a person who can think about taking that content and making it most relevant to the people that they put in front of, sort of framing a story around it, right? Even if you've got basic information on your brochure website, they can think about organizing that information in a way that's responsive to the people who are starting to arrive at your site so that they ultimately sign up for your product. And I think the thing that's especially interesting about hiring someone with this type of profile is that they can expand in a lot of different directions. So they have, basic skill set and basic breadth around introducing like your first real email campaigns, or starting to organize your content strategy, or what looks like a strategy at that point. But they also have the potential to drill into each of those avenues and then optimize some of the MVPs that they put together.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cool.
I think one of the other things that we were chatting a little bit before and you mentioned is like, even if you have these skills, you can hire a person that looks really good on paper, but they don't necessarily have the right temperament or the right skill set, the right profile to be your best first hire. Do you want to talk about some of the
I think
things to look for?
So I worked at like large companies, I've worked at small companies that have scaled, and I've seen kind of the differences in the profiles and people and what they look like. And I think there's a couple personality traits that I think early companies should be thinking about in terms of like what they should be looking for. And I didn't think of this myself. So like one of the articles I've come across was this Google article about what they look for in employees, and you're probably going like Google's like tens of thousands of people. Why is this relevant to startups? But I think it actually kind of hit me home and really applies here. So one of the first things is hiring a profile of someone that's very curious, right? So someone that's really like coming in and not just like accepting things as it is, but really trying to figure out what's working, what's not working, challenging kind of why are we doing it this way? Why can't we doing it this way? Can we improve here? And really kind of pushing the boundaries, right? And then the second trait that was listed in this article was this kind of persistence, right? So the idea of that, okay, you're curious and you have all these ideas, and some people are always thinking about the ideas and the strategy and so forth, but they can't kind of execute and kind of actually make it happen. And it's the idea of like persistence of someone that actually can like drive this cross-functional change, influence cross-functionally like what needs to happen, get the buy-in and so forth, right? And so kind of that early entrepreneurship like mindset of just curiosity and persistence, I think is something that I always test for in interviews and try to kind of weed out good candidates, bad candidates. And when I say easy, it's easy to kind of ask for people's experiences, but I really try to nail into we were trained in behavioral interviewing at PagerDuty, and the concept is really ask for specific examples of how they did something and kind of really drill in, what they did, how they did it, who they worked with, and really kind of find out how that would apply to you and your company, right? And so those traits like always stuck out, right? And then a third thing, which is like a little different, is kind of just being adaptable, right? And so there's people along the way at every startup that are going to kind of fall off because they just couldn't scale and they just couldn't figure out their fit. And I've said this to our Algolia team in one of our offsites recently, is there was this article on First Round I probably read like 5 years ago, and this one was about, the analogy it was using was Legos, right? And so you're a kid playing with Legos, and someone kind of takes one of your Legos away, and your first reaction is to grab the Lego back because it's mine, right? And so thinking about that as like all the things that you own, when you're at an early startup, you focus on a lot of things, right? You might be doing like 5 or 6 different things, as Erin said, but over time you start adding more and more employees, people are kind of taking things away. And I think the key thing is, finding people that are adaptable and not, are not kind of ego, that have that big ego, people that can kind of think about, okay, what's the next big problem I can solve? Where's the next big impact I can make, right? Because that's really going to help the company scale and become more efficient, rather than trying to keep tinkering with the one thing that you're already kind of working on. So those things have always kind of resonated with me in terms of like who I'm hiring for, in terms of like the personalities and skill side and so forth. So
I think what you said actually makes a lot of sense, because I was thinking about my 5th C. It's actually communication, but someone mentioned conversion. And when I think about that first profile, actually I think about those 5 C's, the breadth of them really being about reach.
Yeah.
And so when you think about conversion, it's about taking that reach and turning it into your funnel, right?
Yeah.
I don't know why I roll my eyes. I think funnels are cool. But so when you start to put people down that funnel, then you're thinking about conversion. I think what you're getting at is, how can that first hire become adaptable, so that as you start to, okay, we figured out audience, we figured out awareness, we figured out how to get our message out there. Now we need to make sure that when these people actually become aware of our product and that it aligns with their problem, how do we get them to sign up and use it to solve it? So do you want to talk a little bit about the different maybe first areas that you could start to add as you expand, as you start to think about things like beyond just awareness, but growth, conversion, upsell, et cetera?
So in terms of what, like tooling or?
I think, we have like field marketing, operations, we have communications, PR, some of the different disciplines that we might add to like a smaller team as
So I think, you know, as I kind of think about like the next few hires, like you maybe have a core of 2 or 3 like do-all people. Like there's probably a content person, a product marketing person. You might have like a demand gen person or a customer person. Like there's probably a couple like early roles that are like we talked about, like that jack of all trades. The next like group of like maybe 4 or 5 roles that I think are important to start thinking about are really one maybe around operations, right? And as you start getting bigger and bigger, you really want to track and measure and make sure you're setting up your infrastructure and kind of all your systems correctly and aligning it with, you know, the sales motion and kind of the product instrumentation and so forth. And so I think that's a very important hire, right? You probably want to start thinking about kind of that demand gen kind of growth, like hybrid player, depending on your motion. Are you going after enterprises? Are you kind of going after a large set of like developers, and figuring out like what are the programs and initiatives that are going to drive some of that you know, that motion and inbound. You know, we kind of dabbled in a lot of events and not just like going to trade shows. We're also talking about like hosting our meetups and community events, and thinking about like local field events where we would go to a city and invite, you know, prospects or customers and really kind of show off some of the cool things we're doing in a like high touch, low cost way. And so those are maybe the first like 3 or 4 roles after that initial kind of wave that we hired that we looked for. And then as you kind of start going into new markets, new areas, you know, you start beefing up like customer marketing, you know, PR, you start thinking about maybe more content, you know, writers and folks that are kind of really start thinking about the next piece to kind of scale some of these programs that are working, you know, digital marketing, et cetera. You know, it kind of all comes in waves and so forth. And to be honest, like every 6 months we were changing. So every 6 months we were like kind of assessing like what are the needs and what, not just what we need now, but like what do we foresee we need 6 to 12 months from now, as we talked about, right?
Yeah, and I think like if you're even as you're approaching maybe 10 people on your marketing team, as long as you're thinking, because those early roles are going to have so much breadth to them, as long as you're thinking about hiring someone not to do a job, oh, we need an events person, we committed to all these sponsorships, or we're hosting all these meetups, we need an events person, but rather to solve a problem, like we want to have more face time with our community, or we want to turn our users into fans and be able to measure that down the road, you're going to set yourself up better to scale.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe a couple other like pro tips around that first hire, absolutely. Or first couple of hires. I was going to say, just be careful you don't get too top heavy too fast. You are going to meet a lot of shiny objects. You're going to meet a lot of people that are super cool and super sexy and seem like they could, you know, they worked at the coolest companies, and you want to do what they did. That is probably not the person that did what they did. There was a team of that person. So just think, you know, be careful not to hire your CMO when you've got 20 people. If you are shipping something new, a feature every 2 weeks, like there has to be a comms or marcoms person to communicate that to your users in an effective way as part of the bigger story that you want to tell them over the course of 2, 3, 4 quarters. So make sure you hire out for that. Or if you scale sales because you have new revenue goals, sales, that doesn't just mean creating more demand. It doesn't just mean creating more product marketing or case studies. It doesn't just mean, you know, post-sale customer marketing. It means all of that. And then the last one was just think about boundaries. Like one of the things that I see in marketing, and it happens with support and docs too, particularly, there's a lot of invisible work that happens. Marketing people can become your words person really easily. So they go from putting together a marketing strategy to writing in-product copy because they're good with words and they make things sound better. But while that work is super important, it also takes time. So it can seem invisible, like super fast. I'm guilty of this on the engineering side. Hey, can you just make this one quick change? You know, not realizing that might mean like a full build or whatever. So just think about it from that perspective. Okay, so we talked about marketing. We also talked about marketing. Yeah. Let's talk about tools. Yeah. Okay, so once you hire some people, once you scale out your team a little bit, the smarter, cheaper, faster way to scale is with technology.
Yeah. And so I'm gonna, you guys have probably seen the MarTech 5000. If you haven't, Google it. It's quite ridiculous. So it's this infographic that's published every year of all the different tools in the marketing ecosystem. There's literally like 50 categories of tools, from everything from like lead scoring to advertising to account-based marketing, and all these buzzwords that probably don't really help you very much. And there's literally like 5,000 vendors across this stack, and you're kind of like, where do you even get started, right? Like, what do you need early on, and what do you need later to scale? So we'll kind of just give you a few tips and suggestions, right? So my recommendation early on is you probably don't even need much. Like, so you probably are going to be scrappy, and some of the things that you really want to focus on, I would say, is making sure you have your Google Analytics and kind of your metrics and kind of what you're tracking, figured out, right? Like, how are you instrumenting user behavior on your website? How are you instrumenting learning and tracking, different channels of leads into your data warehouse or whatever you're collecting information, so that way, like, you're building a foundation to set up for later, right? And then there's probably some sort of, I know you'll disagree on this, but like, you probably need some sort of like email tool, like where you're thinking about how you're going to reach your customers. And that doesn't mean go out and buy a heavy marketing automation tool, which is going to require a full-time person and that, but you might buy one of the more lighter weight tools as an interim to kind of a leap toward a full-blown automation tool in time. And then I think as you kind of start scaling, there's a lot of other tools that kind of come into play, right? And so some of the things that like I would need in every company is there's an optimization tool, right? So today, because we're small and scrappy at Algolia, we're using Google Optimize, which is a free part of our Google Analytics. But something like an Optimizely is something I've used regularly in almost every company I've been at. You're going to want something like a Kissmetrics that's giving you information about user behavior and kind of the attribution on kind of where people are going. There's things like Crazy Egg, which helps you kind of understand where people are doing what on your website and kind of the behaviors and patterns of where they're going. And then there's all the advertising tools that you're going to be exposed to. There's all the attribution tools that you might need. I think those are kind of the foundational tools that at least that I've started with. And then I think everything else to me kind of starts sounding like buzzwords, right? And then you really have to kind of strip out the noise. Like, I think everyone's talking about account-based marketing, and there's literally like 30 vendors that do there's probably account-based marketing is like a discipline of 10 things. And there's maybe 100 vendors, and everyone says they do account-based marketing, and you don't know what you need to actually do the whole thing. So rather than kind of fall into the trap of trying to get one thing and then not be able to do all of it, you could probably get by and do some of the principles of account-based marketing through using your Google AdWords and doing retargeting to a specific set of companies, using your database and going after outbound with your reps. And kind of getting by with some of the early tactics and just being a little more scrappy until you really start thinking about needing it, and then you hire a full-time person that can really figure out what it's going to take to scale those programs out, right? So for me, it's really about the tracking and the metrics and some of the early optimization that I would really focus on. But that's me, and I come from more a transactional kind of background company. I don't know if you guys used anything different, or if you guys thought about anything differently.
No, I think you really nailed it. If I had to sort of summarize and maybe call out one or 2 points, it would be product-centric companies, particularly technology companies, were really good at building products and applying these principles around scaling in response to need. But the tension is that marketers are really good at marketing, and so you imagine the people that are building marketing tools are really good at making you think that you need them, right? And so if you can resist that tension and build out only when you need to solve a specific problem, not because you think you should be doing something, then you'll be in a much better situation. As a rule of thumb, if something costs $10,000, you probably don't need it. You don't need an analyst subscription, you don't need PR contact software, you don't need you probably don't even need super expensive webcast software to run your first webcast series. So just keep that in the back of your mind.
I think to add to that, I think you hit it perfectly home, is that you don't want to go overboard. The cost of these tools is one thing, but then you also have people to support it, and that takes away from other things. And if those people leave, or if those people are focused on other initiatives, that tool kind of goes to die, and so you're kind of stuck with paying something significant for something maybe you're not even really fully using. So I just really be, in a way, leery, but also be open-minded to is it really going to help us? What are the things that can help us do? But make sure we have a plan on how we're going to leverage it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you thought I might disagree with you when it came to email, mostly because email software in particular. I wouldn't. Like, I think MailChimp is a great tool to grow with you, and you can build really awesome integrations with Salesforce, or maybe, you know, with something custom that you want to do. Based on wherever it is you're storing your user data. What I would be conscientious about is what the trade-offs are. So do you need to figure out how to manage 2 separate unsubscribe bases later on? Do you need to figure out an architecture where you've got sales emails, transactional product emails, and marketing emails that all live in different places? So just being thoughtful of those things, and like knowing how hard any kind of migration is, like try not to make the mistake early that you have to pay for later, you know, like future us has to pay for.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking about GDPR in my head, and like that's a little so. I think we're out of time, actually.
Okay.
So we might just need to get to Q&A.
Okay.
But I think we covered almost everything, so yeah.
Cool. I can take this one because I've actually just recently had this exact challenge. So Netlify is about 25 people right now, and our marketing team is me and an awesome dev advocate. And as much as I've like spent the last 10, 12 years doing B2B and business to developer marketing, my forte is not PR by any stretch of the imagination. However, one thing our co-founders have done really, really well is build a network of advisors and influencers. And so what we were able to do is basically, we just recently basically relaunched. We launched some new branding, we launched a new pricing model, and we launched some really cool features. And so what we were able to do is like reach out to our experts. Malia from Heavybit helped me get a ton of PR contacts. She helped us with some of the pitching. We're also funded by Andreessen and Bloomberg Beta, both of whom have awesome PR people who helped out. The one thing I will say, the mistake that I made, is that when you get help from experts, what you're really paying for is their relationships as much as their time. So you can craft a wonderful message. That's something I'd be wary of. I've been fortunate enough to work with really awesome, well-known PR firms in the city with who work with really large companies, but when you're telling a very specific story, it's hard to get them to tell that story the way you would tell it. So be diligent about crafting your message, and then make sure you're very clear about what you want the outcome to be. Is if it's you want like a quantity of specific kinds of stories, or do you need help figuring out how to position your story, and then build your strategy from there. Don't just default to, we need PR, therefore we need a firm.
Yes. First, it kind of starts with like who you're going after, right? And I assume because we're at Heavybit, it's probably some sort of developer-focused audience. Like what level are they? Are they manager? Are they kind of the actual developer? And try to just figure out like who they are and where they kind of operate and so forth, right? And so I think the next piece is then really to understand, you know, how can you reach them in a way without having to like start, you know, spending globs of money. I think email is obviously one good channel, and that's kind of where I would start thinking about is like, how do you maybe, you know, host some meetups? How do you kind of actually do some of those like more scrappier kind of engagements where you can kind of, you know, get that high touch? And then you might want to just think about, you know, how do you, you know, partner with other companies? How do you actually, you know, leverage some other, you know, folks in your network to kind of tell that story together out there, you know, through some sort of partner network? I think you talked about docs as like an area that you guys focused a lot on that drove a lot of traffic inbound. Maybe you can cover that in a second, but like we at, you know, Algolia spend a lot of time giving kind of developer community gifts that like, you know, are like basically using our search experience and allowing them to kind of embedded within some of their sites and allowing them, like allowing basically that gift to be seen by like many, many people. And that in turn has like led to a lot of inbound traffic for us and people to kind of see like our benefits. So I think you just have to kind of get creative and think outside the box, right? It's like, how do you take your product and how do you kind of get it out to like mass appeal by either building something for them, allowing them to play around with something, making something like easily shareable or accessible, and then kind of, you know, going from there. And that might be like trying 3 or 4 or 5 different things and seeing like 90% of them fail, but that one thing that's going to stick might actually be the one that starts kind of that trajectory, right? You want to add anything there?
Just one quick thought, just to reinforce this idea of being ridiculously generous, building open source tools or tools that allow people to maybe not just solve a problem, but understand their problem at that early stage is great. You know, email's awesome, but email is to an audience that you already own. So how do you get in front of people that you don't own or don't yet know that they have a problem? So I think about something like Matt and Chris built when they were just getting started at Netlify was test my site. Like, how slow is my site? We build a super lightning fast we have a super lightning fast global CDN, and we can make your site a lot faster. So let's help you understand whether or not your site is fast or slow. That's the type of thing that if you are just generous in spending your time doing that, people become self-aware, and then they're very thankful to you for having helped them understand that problem. Own the fact that you're a badass engineer or something, and you can go out and give talks and show people how to do that and show them who else has done it. Spend a lot of time, you know, like he said, where people are, answer questions on Stack Overflow, write articles on Medium,
Twitter, etc.
Twitter, just spend a lot of time where people are.
Yeah, and so your second question was around the website traffic and kind of how you optimize that, maybe absence of like a lot of traffic. Yeah, okay, so common thing. So when we were at WebEx, like we used to test the shit out of everything. That was kind of like one of our core principles. I actually swore. That was one of our core principles, was to like test everything and often, right? We used to get a lot of traffic. And then I went to Marin Software, and you know, that testing principle was in my mind, and you go there and this is a company that's like very enterprisey and like a fraction of the traffic, right? So you just couldn't test a lot of things in a reasonable amount of time to get any learnings and stuff, right? I think at that point, you kind of have to use some intuition and gut. I think at the end of the day, like constantly kind of understanding your metrics and the user flows, like what they're doing on the website, where they're dropping off potentially, and really kind of optimizing for like the behaviors and the flows. You know, Google Analytics will give you like information like where people are clicking, what they're doing, where they're dropping off from. And there's probably sites and other areas that you might want to just think about emulating that are kind of like, hey, these are like well built, they tell a good story. You know, it's clear to the point. And I think if I give you just like some more tangible advice, it's that like I hate going to sites where I have no idea what they do. It's like just the wording is just overcomplicated. Sometimes it's better just to like dumb it down for like a second grader tone, just so it's easy and clear, like, hey, this is what we do and this is how we're gonna help you, right? You might wanna play around with like whether if you're going after a developer, I think we were talking about this earlier, is like, is your messaging gonna be more towards kind of your solution and your offering, or is it more value-based, right? Like the marketers are always taught, think about value before kind of the solution, but maybe in the early phase, as you're trying to kind of get that momentum to that developer space and getting them to see and feel the product, you might talk about more of the actual products and features, right? And so I think that's kind of where I would play around with a lot of that. Again, like you said, you might not be able to like test this A/B, but you'll be able to like, you know, think about, you know, like just where you actually can, like where are the choke points and how do you get better, right? The principle of marketing is like when you're talking about messaging, you can talk about the features that you're selling. So, you know, like this is, like we have this feature that does this, we have that feature that does that, and cool, it tells you exactly what you do. But when you're selling to, you know, your persona or whoever you're going after, the idea that, you know, they might not care about the feature, they want to know how this actually benefits them, right? So is it saving them time? Is it going to help them make more money? Is it going to do X, Y, Z better, right? And so value selling is always kind of the direction that you want to go to, because that also then shows off, like if someone's just only seeing the features, they might not think they realize it or they need it, but when you're talking about the value, it becomes a lot more stickier and kind of, you know, you kind of expose them to a lot more of the opportunity there, right? So anything to add there?
No.
Okay. Look, I think AWS is like a great show. We go every year, and we've actually started spending more and more every year we go. It's just very crowded. It's just also very expensive, and you know, unless you go in with a plan, like you might not get the most value out of spending that 100,000. So, you know, you might want to have a presence. Maybe early on, you go to AWS, you have some people that are on the floor. Maybe you host something, you know, on site where you kind of get someone to like a side like meetup or a party or something around it. And then maybe as you get bigger and you start generating more revenue, maybe that's kind of when you start investing in something like a conference where it makes sense. You know, that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. It's always worked really well for us. Like AWS was like the biggest lead generator and kind of where we anchored a lot of our messaging and releases around too. So if done right, and if you're able to kind of rally around your resources to that, I think it's a fantastic conference. I'm just trying to like make sure as you think about it, like don't go all eggs in basket in that one thing. But you know, I know of other companies, which I probably shouldn't say, but I know some companies that have gone all in on AWS and have done really well too, right? So I think it's kind of like, Yeah, and thing is, they took their entire company there. They were there for like, they flew every 40 person team at that point. They were all hands on deck. Everyone was aggressive. Everyone was thinking about leads and revenue and pipeline and meetings and like, using that time as effective as possible. So it's really kind of the mindset you go in with it.
This is one of my favorite topics.
Yeah.
Nerd alert.
Yeah.
So I think that there's this like massive misconception in developer marketing where there's this idea of enterprise versus developer, and that you have developer-centric messaging and you have enterprise-centric messaging, and that these enterprise people are like cold, dark gray thunderclouds, and these developers are like beautiful sunshine rainbows. And that's how we talk to them, and then this is how we talk to enterprise people. And so if I'm answering particularly around the messaging, like what I would tell you is that all this is, we would call it persona development, but all this is understanding who the people are who are actually buying your products and which type of products they're buying and where they come into the buying cycle. So I had a conversation with our head of sales yesterday, and one of the things we were talking about, as he was talking me through his deal cycle, is when in your deal cycle, which in Salesforce has 5 stages, which of these stages do you encounter someone who is not either an engineer or some sort of engineering manager? And the answer right now is almost never. So to me, that says we're all sunshine and rainbows across the board, right? It's just a matter of what type of problem we're solving for each of those people and how we talk to them about how they understand our product and what it does for their team. So in as far as messaging goes, I would say like avoid the trap of becoming an enterprise silo and a developer silo. In fact, what you'll ultimately end up with is like one really gorgeous funnel that has like dual outputs, and one of those outputs is a maybe like faster direct track to revenue at scale, and the other is more about growing individual usage. And then in terms of the actual contact flow, we were talking a little bit about this earlier, but how you make sure you have synchronicity between where you store your user data and where you store your contact data. So making sure that if you have information in Salesforce, you can map a user all the way through. Yeah. One of the things at GitHub that we saw was that overwhelmingly, like 6-figure deals came from an individual advocate who loved GitHub and fought for it in their organization. And then it was, an engineer and their manager and their manager and their manager. And then maybe along the line, we introduced a CTO, and then it was a CIO, and then it was a security team. But we had an answer and a way of speaking to each of those personas, and it didn't have to be, thunderclouds and rain and bad weather. Like if it's a different persona than the individual developer that's going and advocating for your tool within those organizations, like maybe it is that VP of engineering who's looking to understand how this solves a very specific problem for them. They might arrive on your site at a different type of landing page that has specific messaging for them, and then you'd know that they're more likely to be in a position where they want to talk to a sales rep versus explore documentation and spin up a prototype or a project. And if that's the case, then you're really optimizing for that person's journey into a specific landing page on your site. Like obviously you want to avoid like sign up here, talk to our enterprise reps here, because that's not the same person. And if it is the same person, like give them look for leading indicators of how they behave in the product. Like, do you have grayed out areas where people can start to add administration constraints to their account? Like, have they started to explore that? Like, give them a path to talk to sales through that avenue once they've indicated likelihood to buy, or that they likely would have a team that would need to buy this thing.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would just maybe add to that is like, I don't think the 2 different call to actions or multiple calls is necessarily a bad thing. You might want to test out kind of the journeys and the pathways there, but like I always am a big believer like different people will enter the paths or the funnels differently. And some people are more willing to take a trial and kind of play around with it and want to be more hands-on, and some people want to talk to a salesperson, or some people want to see some videos. I always am like you don't want to give them too many options because you want to kind of narrow down their options, but like at the same time you might want to just like figure out, okay, where are they landing, where are they coming from, who is that person, and what are they most likely to want to do. So if it is like a VP or someone that's like a manager, they maybe are less likely to like play around with it and configure, but they maybe want to actually just talk to someone and think about like, is this the right thing for us today, right? Where if it's more of the developer than user, they like maybe more likely just want to play around with it and see how is this actually going to work for us, right? So I'm kind of open-ended on that. I think you can kind of, and in worst case, if you have the traffic, test it, right? You can figure out like if I remove one of the CTAs, are we going to get more of that one, or like kind of just figure out like what is actually working for us. Yeah. No, this has been fun.
No, yeah, I don't want to have interrupt beer time.
I know we're welcome. I mean, thank you all for being here, and
you're welcome.
I was gonna say thank you all for being here, and I mean, we're gonna stick around. So I mean, I'm happy to answer more questions.
Yeah, please.
Cool.